Inflation reached the highest it's been in 40 years, peaking at 9% in June, and Americans are paying the price. People are shelling out more and more for everything from gas, food, and other basic goods, but leading Democrats are attempting to redirect the focus and claim that inflation is a global problem, not just a U.S. problem.
Here is Progressive Senator Bernie Sanders on CNN's State of the Union speaking about the issue.
I think it's important that when we talk about inflation, Republicans will say, well, this is Joe Biden's fault. Really? Our inflation rate is much too high. It is 8%. It is 10% in the UK, 10% throughout Europe, 7% in Canada. Inflation is a global problem.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi sang the same tune when she went on CBS's Face the Nation. Let's watch.
The fact is that when I hear people talk about inflation, as I heard him there, we have to change that subject. Inflation is a global phenomenon.
Yes.
The EU, the European Union, the UK, the British have higher inflation rate than we do here. It's not, the fight is not about inflation, it's about the cost of living. And if you look at what we have done to bring down the cost of prescription drugs, to bring down the cost of energy and the rest in our legislation, you will see that that has been opposed every step of the way by the Republicans, and they have no plan for lowering the cost of living or helping with inflation.
I don't know what she's talking about for lowering the cost of energy.
I think they mean the strategic oil reserves, the 15 million barrels, whatever, that have been released.
Sure, a very short-sighted plan. But nevertheless, why? I don't see why it excuses Biden or Biden policies to say that other countries that have had similar policies are also suffering from inflation. Like, how does that get our leaders off the hook? Well,
so two things are happening here. I think the argument is right that there's some aspect of the inflation that is global and not predictable. It's caused by the Republicans are blaming a $1,400 check that was given out 2 years ago for the inflation that we're having right now. They're laying the cause of the feet.
Well, a $1,400 check times hundreds of millions of people.
Well, they're laying the blame at the feet of the social support services that enabled so many people to survive through the early days of COVID. And the point that Democrats are making is that you can't attribute it to that when you see global inflation rates being similar in other countries who did various different things to head off the worst effects of COVID. So Republicans on some level do have to reckon with the fact that EU, it's 10.9%, Germany, 10.9%, UK, 10.1%, Italy, 9.4%. America's down below all of those countries on the list. It is a little bit lower in Canada, but still high. It's very high in Canada as well. So the argument isn't that America has done it best compared to the rest of the world, but it's that when you see all of these numbers globally, you have to get at the root of what is causing inflation and not pretend that if Republicans are magically in office, it's going to go away. People are going to be in for a rude awakening if they wake up. Inflation is still high, and Republicans also aren't willing to give you any of the social safety net that helps you survive.
Also spent a lot of money and also had shutdowns of their economy for long periods of time. So that doesn't excuse these policies.
What country would you want America to be modeled on in terms of how it addressed COVID and inflation?
I would want to, none of these countries. They've all done things that are bad.
What is the model? What is the recommendation?
We should stop spending more money than we have to spend.
So what is the Republican recommendation? That there shouldn't have been $2,000 checks? Are Republicans going to run on no checks? Because right now in Florida, Ron DeSantis is administering the COVID aid that his state received, rightly so, to help people out in the form of checks per child. So the same kind of program that was extremely popular that Democrats implemented, the child tax credit, Ron DeSantis is
it can be popular and still cause inflation. Whether it's unpopular has nothing to do with anything. That's what you run on.
Regardless of the inflationary effects, thinks it's a good idea, and that's the point. At the time, there is an awareness that a certain degree of spending can cause inflation. But unless you are going to sit out here and own the fact that you are going to say people should die on the streets, people should be homeless, people should be able to afford food, people should be able to afford gas, because the number one thing is
spending trillions of dollars feels good in the short term, but gets us in a bad place for our economy.
Well, that is Republicans. I'm forcing you to do, Robby, here. What Democrats should be forcing Republicans to do.
Well, Republicans are just as dishonest as Democrats, but they need to be honest with the people that spending this amount of money is bad for the economy in the long run. Shutting down the economy is bad for
But you don't get to paint half the picture. Do you think people should not have gotten $1,400 checks? Yes or no? That's the question Republicans have to answer. Do you?
Yeah,
think
I also wouldn't have shut down businesses beyond the initial.
Fine, don't. Do you think that
that would have been a great idea?
Do you think that Republicans should cut Medicare and Social Security because that's what they're angling to do right now? Yes or no? These are. I really appreciate that you can think that mistakes were made. I have a difference of opinion about. With Republicans about whether or not the COVID interventions were right, proper, and good. I do think there were a lot of corporate payoffs and PPP loans and a lot of things that shouldn't have gone out that Republicans have had no issue with as well, and corporate Democrats have had no issue with as well, and they have happily taken those funds, and that's fine. But you can say mistakes are made, but now we're in the today, and people are suffering. You don't get to go on TV and out of one side of your mouth say, people are suffering. What are we going to do? Democrats are failing. Americans are struggling. They can't afford milk. They can't afford gas. And then on the other side have absolutely no solution for it but to say, oh, remember a year ago when we did help you out a little bit with those things? We shouldn't have done that either, and we're not going to do that going forward.
And also when we bailed out the airline industry, and when we bailed out
we should have bought the airline industry. It would have been cheaper.
And when we sent Ukraine millions of dollars.
I agree with all of that.
There are all these,
I agree with all of that.
Some aspects of our spending and our social safety net are more defensible than others.
I 100% agree. And I think where we can agree on this, Robby, is that the problem is that the focus of both Republicans and a lot of corporate Dems is always first and foremost to cut those benefits that go to the poorest, most fragile, struggling people on the margins, and not to talk about the war in Ukraine spending, not to talk about some of the other things that you mentioned. It's all Social Security, Medicare, and hurting the poor. I
don't know that Republicans mainly talk about those things.
It's not cutting taxes for the rich, which are at a historically low rate. It's never those kinds of conversations. What about all the spending that's happening by the 1%?
Are Republicans currently myopically focused on Social Security? I don't think so.
They are.
They never talk about it.
No, they never talk about it because they know it's unpopular. They want to secretly cut Social Security and Medicare. They want to secretly do those things.
Given up on that.
No, they absolutely have not. And Bernie Sanders has been trying. I'm sorry, I'm bringing up Bernie Sanders, but he's literally the only person who has his eye on the prize in that. Because guess what? A lot of Democrats want to cut Social Security and Medicaid too. Barack Obama wanted to cut Social Security and Medicare. And we have to start focusing on what the elites are doing to the poorest people in this country.
Okay, but Social Security is going to go insolvent. Part of it is
Social Security was designed to go insolvent by a test being put on a funding test.
The people paying into it right now are not going to get the benefits they're paying into, and I do think that is a problem. There are a range of ways you could solve it, but it is just letting it go the way it is not a.
Don't cut it and do things like what was it, Marco Rubio, or was it Ted Cruz? I'm sorry, I forget. But one of them, their big plan was to they're constantly trying to raise the retirement age in a world where people are dying earlier for a whole host of reasons, including, I'm sorry, the ongoing pandemic. The Republicans' plan is to make it, you're concerned about people not getting the benefit of their Social Security. No one's going to get the benefit of their Social Security if you have to live to the age of 70 to even cash in.
Well, I don't. To punish people paying into it right now, I mean, how much more do you tax, young people when they're not going to get that benefit? I mean, it's generational crime, generational theft.
Yeah, well, you should get the benefit. Talk about generational theft. Our whole generation is fakakta, as they say.
Yeah, by some of these entitlement programs.
No, the problem is, the solution is to return to a tax rate that we had in the golden age of the 1950s and 60s, where the rich actually paid their fair share.
20 years longer than they did.
When the rich paid their fair share, and start to reform some of these programs to make it more beneficial for the poorest and most working class people in this country. Not to say the solution is to simply turn off the
millions and billions of dollars.
No, it's not.
What is their fair share?
No, they don't. The top tax bracket used to be upwards of 90% in the 1960s, which doesn't mean that rich people pay 90% of their earnings. What it means is that over a certain income amount, the additional wealth is taxed at a higher rate. We can't even get people on board with a tax on 2 cents for every dollar that Elizabeth Warren was advocating for during the campaign. And when I say people, I don't mean the American people who find the wealth tax overwhelmingly popular. It's the corporatists in Washington and both parties who refuse to give that kind of a policy that could bail out the American people a fair hearing.
I mean, there's so many things we're doing to benefit corporations that have nothing to do with lowering their taxes, including much of our entire pandemic policy being a giveaway to Pfizer.
Entirely agree. They should start there.
All right, we're being told we got to go. More Rising after this.